The final unit explained the possibilities of creating three-dimensional structures and fabrics. By the end of this unit, students will be able to outline the process of partial knitting, outline the process of integral knitting, demonstrate ways to use these techniques to create customized variations. What if you can have a dart while knitting the fabric itself? What about a pocket with a flap is also added into the fabric while knitting? All these are reality if you are working in flat knits. Let's look at the possibility of having a diagonal stripe in a swatch as shown in the diagram. To achieve this, we need to split the diagram into 5 parts. We can start knitting the part 1 in the usual way. Once we move on to the second part, we have to do partial knitting. When a course is knitted repeatedly on few needles instead of the entire width of the fabric by not releasing old loops is known as partial knitting. To knit part 2, we have to constantly reduce the knitting width from right to left without releasing the loops on the right side. When the part 3 is knitted, the first course of the stripe will get attached to the existing fabric tip, forming a diagonal stripe. Now, compensate the partial knitting done in the second segment by knitting fourth segment partially from the opposite side as shown in the diagram. Complete the swatch with the fifth segment. In this swatch, the partial knitting done on segment 2 has not been compensated later. Instead, repeat segment 2 and 3 to produce radiating stripe effect. To create a bubble shape with a single jersey, the knit plan would be as shown in the diagram. Let's divide the diagram into 3 segments and do partial knitting as shown. The first and third segment will join together wherever the second segment is not knitting, creating a bubble. This technique can be used to create fullness in fabric as is done with the darts in woven garments. To create a three-dimensional structure, we can use the bubble design with a back knit. To achieve this, start with segment 1 and just before starting of segment 2, give a front and back knit to the entire width of the segment 2. Now, back bed would be holding all the loops and continue knitting segment 2. Once the segment is over, transfer the holding loops from back bed to the front bed and continue knitting the segment 3. In this way, you can achieve a very narrow protruding bubble. We can create vertical, diagonal and horizontal slits in fabrics with partial knitting. Vertical slits. To produce vertical slits, we have to knit the segment on the right side of the slit and the left side of the slit with different feeders. It is very much like creating intarsia without joining two panels with the text stitch. Horizontal slit. To create horizontal slit, you can bind off the required knit area and then start knitting again on the same set of needles. A combination of partial knitting and horizontal slit technique can be used to produce a diagonal slit. This method can also be used to create different type of buttonholes. Integral knitting is the method by which we can integrate different parts of the garments together during knitting. We are knitting part A, part B separately and trying to integrate together and continue knitting part C. Please note, part A and part C are knitted in the back bed and part B is knitted in the front bed. Let's begin with part A. Complete the knitting of part A in the back bed. Now start knitting part B on the empty front bed needles. Knit part B completely. Transfer all the loops to the back bed. Continue knitting on back bed to finish part C. Let's look at another example. This time all the parts are to be knitted with the front bed only. Let us start the knitting with part A in the front bed, complete the knitting of part A, then transfer to the back bed. Now start part B on the empty front bed. Complete knitting and then transfer back the part A from back bed to front bed. Start knitting the part C to complete the swatch. Let us look at a variation of the first example. After knitting part A and B, do not transfer all the part B to the back bed. Transfer few loops to the back and continue knitting on back bed. Now transfer few more loops. This way we can attach part B into the back bed with desired shapes. You have seen in this previous example the part B curls. Single jersey will curl in its edges. What if you need a pocket flap to be created the same way without curl at the edges? To do this, start knitting part A as usual. Now transfer all the loops to the back bed. In the next step, move alternate loops of back bed to the adjacent needles. This way, alternate needles in the back bed would be empty. Now start knitting part B with 1 by 1 rib structure, knitting on empty needles of the back bed needle. Complete the part B and then transfer all the loops either to the back bed or to the front bed and continue knitting part C. This way, it is possible to create different garment parts such as collar, placket, pocket, flaps, etc. to be integrated to the body panels. Let's look at some more examples of partial and integral knitting. You have come to the end of this unit and course. To summarize, in this unit, you have explored the possibilities of creating three-dimensional structures and even three-dimensional fabrics with contouring to fit the human body using partial knitting and integral knitting techniques. Thank you.